I stood in the parking lot of my own restaurant at 6 in the morning, watching a moving truck back up to the loading dock, and I had no idea why. My name is Vivienne, and I built Magnolia Table from nothing. Not from a loan my parents co-signed, not from a trust fund, not from a husband's seed money. From 4 years of double shifts at a steakhouse in Charleston, from a business plan I wrote on napkins, from a tiny storefront in a strip mall that I turned into the most requested reservation in the historic district. By the time I was 32, Magnolia Table had a 6-week waitlist and a write-up in Southern Living. I was, by any measure, exactly the kind of woman my fiancé's family should have been proud to welcome in. They were not proud, they were tolerating me. I'd known it since the engagement dinner 18 months earlier, when my future mother-in-law, Eleanor, had looked at my hands, the same hands that had spent a decade gripping hot pans and filleting fish, and said, in front of the whole table, "Well, at least you're good with your hands. That'll come in handy when you're running Garrison House someday." Garrison House was the family's event venue, a sprawling antebellum-style property out past the river that hosted weddings, galas, and the occasional political fundraiser. Eleanor ran it like a queen runs a court. And from the moment I got engaged to her son, she had made it clear, in that syrupy, smiling Charleston way, that I was an employee who happened to be marrying in, not a daughter who happened to be joining the family. My fiancé's name was Hayes Calloway III, if you wanted the full ceremonial weight of it. He was sweet in the way that men raised by domineering mothers are sweet, eager to please everyone, terrified to disappoint anyone, and somehow always landing on his mother's side whenever the two of us disagreed. I used to tell myself that once we were married, once Eleanor saw I wasn't going anywhere, she'd ease up. I told myself a lot of things. The wedding was supposed to be at Garrison House. Eleanor had insisted, practically demanded, that we host it there instead of at my restaurant's courtyard, which had been my first choice. "It's tradition," she'd said. "Every Calloway wedding for 3 generations has been at Garrison House. You wouldn't want to break that, would you?" I hadn't wanted to start my marriage by fighting my mother-in-law over real estate, so I agreed. Worse, I agreed to let her handle the venue logistics, since she technically owned the property and knew the staff. I signed nothing. I assumed, God, I was so stupid. That family meant I didn't need a contract with family. 210 guests were supposed to arrive at 11 that morning. My bridesmaids and I had spent the night before at a bed and breakfast 15 minutes away, and I'd woken up at 5, too excited to sleep, and driven over early just to see the place one more time before the chaos started. Instead, I found movers loading folding chairs, archways, and pallets of rented dishware into a truck that had Garrison House's logo on the side. A young man in a polo shirt with a clipboard, who I later learned was the assistant event coordinator, saw my car pull in and visibly flinched. "Ms. Reyes," he said, "my last name not yet Calloway, not ever going to be Calloway, as it turned out. I'm so sorry, I thought someone called you." "Called me about what?" "The event was moved, Mrs. Calloway came in Tuesday with paperwork. She said she had the authority since it's in her name on the lease, and the wedding was technically a private function she was hosting, and she rebooked the date for the Ashford Society Gala instead. She said you'd already been informed." I stood there in my pajama pants and an old Magnolia Table hoodie, no makeup, hair still wet from the shower, and felt something in my chest go very cold and very still. Not panic. Panic would come later. This was something quieter, the click of a puzzle piece finally falling into a picture I hadn't wanted to see. I called Hayes. He picked up on the second ring, groggy. "Hey baby, why are you up so early? Today's the, did you know your mother canceled our wedding?" Silence. The kind of silence that answers the question better than words ever could. "She didn't cancel it," he finally said. "She just thought it'd be better to push it to next month. There's a thing with the insurance on the ballroom, and she didn't want to stress you out before the big day, so she said she'd handle it and tell you when it was settled." Hayes. There are 210 people getting in cars right now to come to a venue that is being emptied for a different event. Today. In 5 hours, okay, let me call her. Let me figure this out. Don't panic. Don't panic. I have built a business that survived a hurricane, a kitchen fire, and a health inspector with a personal vendetta, by never once panicking when someone told me not to. So I didn't panic. I did something much more useful. I started making calls of my own. The first call was to my event manager at Magnolia Table, a woman named Priya, who had been with me since year 1 and who I trusted with my life. "Priya, I need the courtyard cleared and dressed for 200 guests by 10:30. I know it's insane. I will pay every single person triple. Can you do it?" Vivi, it's a restaurant courtyard, not a ballroom. I don't need a ballroom. I need somewhere my guests can stand that isn't a parking lot. Can you do it? There was a pause, and then, I'll call the florist. Get here. The second call was to my florist, Dahlia, who I'd worked with for years and who, bless her, was already awake doing prep for another event. The third call was to my cousin Marisol, who had a box truck for her catering side business, and who within 20 minutes was loading my own dishware and chair rentals out of my restaurant's storage and driving them 4 blocks to the courtyard. The fourth call was to my brother, who happened to be a part-time DJ and who could rig up a sound system in his sleep. I did not call Eleanor. I did not have anything to say to Eleanor yet, because I didn't trust myself not to say something I'd regret saying to a woman I might, God forbid, still be related to by lunchtime. What I did instead was drive to Garrison House. By the time I arrived, the movers were nearly done, and Eleanor was standing on the front portico in a cream silk suit, sipping coffee from a Garrison House mug, supervising the transformation of my venue into the staging ground for the Ashford Society's Spring Gala. An event, I would later learn, that the Ashford Society's chairwoman had personally begged Eleanor to host after their original venue fell through. Eleanor had said yes to them, and said nothing to me. She saw me get out of my car, and her expression did something remarkable. It barely moved at all. Vivienne, you're up early, you cancelled my wedding. I rescheduled your wedding. There's a difference. The Ashford Gala is an extraordinarily important event for this family's standing, and frankly, dear, 200 guests for a restaurant girl's wedding isn't quite the same caliber of. She stopped herself, but not soon enough. I mean to say, it can be rebooked. Weddings can wait. The Ashford Society cannot. I own a building 4 blocks from here with a courtyard that seats 300, I said. I don't need your venue, Eleanor. I never did. I let you have this because Hayes asked me to keep the peace. But you just told 210 people, most of whom are flying or driving in from out of state, that my wedding doesn't matter as much as your garden party. Don't be dramatic. You'll find somewhere. I already did. That stopped her mid-sip. Here is the thing about Eleanor Calloway that I hadn't fully understood until that morning, standing on her portico in my pajamas while a forklift moved a pallet of chairs 8 feet to my left. She had never once, in 18 months, considered that I might actually win. She had built her entire identity around being the gatekeeper, the woman who decided who belonged and who didn't, who got the good venue and who got moved aside, who was real Calloway family and who was just visiting. She had never had to deal with someone who simply built her own door. I left her on the portico and drove back to Magnolia Table, and what happened over the next 4 hours is genuinely one of the proudest mornings of my life, separate from anything Eleanor did or didn't do. My staff, people I had hired, trained, fed family meal to every single shift for years, turned my restaurant's courtyard into a wedding venue in under 5 hours. Priya strung cafe lights through the live oaks out back. Dahlia showed up with armfuls of magnolia branches and white hydrangea, because of course she did, because the restaurant is named after the flower for a reason, and she had a standing order with a grower 40 minutes away. My sous chef, a quiet genius named Felix, took one look at the chaos and said, I've got the reception menu handled, go put your dress on, and meant it with such total confidence that I actually believed him. I texted my wedding planner, a woman named Roz, who I'd hired mostly to manage Eleanor, frankly, and who turned out to be worth every penny of her fee that morning. Roz got on the phone with the guest list and sent a mass text. New location, Magnolia Table, 11:30 a.m., same address you've eaten at 100 times. Trust me, it's better. By 10:40, my courtyard had string lights, 200 folding chairs draped in linen Marisol had pulled from her own inventory, an arch wrapped in magnolia branches, and a string quartet that Roz had bullied into arriving an hour early. By 11, guests were arriving, confused, then charmed, recognizing the restaurant, realizing they were about to eat the best food of their lives at a wedding instead of rubber chicken at a rented ballroom. I got dressed in my restaurant's office, the same room where I'd signed my first lease, where I'd cried after my first bad health inspection, where I'd done payroll every Sunday night for 6 years. My mother, who had flown in from Savannah and who had never trusted Eleanor for one single second, zipped up my dress and said, You know this is the wedding you actually wanted, don't you? You just didn't know it yet. Hayes arrived at 11:15, ashen, having spent the morning in what he described as the worst conversation of my life with his mother. I want to be honest about something here. He did eventually do the right thing. He stood at the altar, the literal archway built by my florist out of branches my restaurant had grown in its own courtyard garden, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected, Eleanor, who had shown up uninvited, 15 minutes late, still in her cream suit, opened her mouth. I just think everyone should know this venue was a desperate last-minute substitution because, Mom. Hayes didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Sit down or leave. She sat down. It was, possibly, the first time in his entire adult life that Hayes had spoken to her like that, and I watched something shift in her face. Not remorse, not yet, but the dawning recognition that the ground beneath her had moved. We got married in my own courtyard, under lights my own staff had hung, eating food my own kitchen had cooked, in front of 210 people who, by the time the toast started, agreed it was the best wedding they'd ever attended. Better, several of them said later, than anything Garrison House could have offered, because every single detail of it had been made with love instead of obligation. The story didn't end there, though, and this is the part I think people actually want to hear about. 3 weeks after the wedding, I found out, through Roz, who had connections all over the event industry in Charleston, that Eleanor had in fact taken a deposit from the Ashford Society to guarantee the date at Garrison House, on top of the deposit she'd already kept from canceling my contract with her own son's wedding. 2 deposits, same date, same venue, pocketed within days of each other. I also found out, because Charleston's wedding and event world is smaller than you'd think, that I wasn't the only bride Eleanor had quietly bumped over the years for more important bookings. There were at least 3 others, going back nearly a decade, women who'd been politely informed their dates had logistics issues right before Garrison House hosted something more prestigious in their place. I run a restaurant. I did not, historically, run an investigation. But I had built a business by understanding exactly how systems and reputations work in this city, and I knew precisely what to do with information like that. I didn't go to the news, not at first. I went to the Charleston Bridal Collective, a private network of planners, florists, caterers, and venue managers that every serious vendor in the city belongs to, and I laid out, calmly and with documentation, exactly what had happened to my wedding and what I'd learned had happened to at least 3 others. I didn't need a press conference. I needed the people who refer business to Garrison House to know what kind of business it actually was. Within 6 weeks, 2 major planning firms quietly pulled Garrison House from their preferred vendor lists. A wedding blog that covers the Lowcountry circuit ran a piece, not naming Eleanor directly, but detailed enough that anyone in the industry knew exactly who and what it was about, on double booking practices at historic Charleston venues. Garrison House's bookings, I'm told, fell off considerably over the following year. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds, and I don't want it to sound like I orchestrated some elaborate revenge plot from a place of bitterness. I didn't have to orchestrate anything. I simply stopped protecting a woman who had never once protected me and let the truth move at its own speed through a community that was more than ready to hear it. Hayes and I are still married, 3 years later now. It wasn't easy after that wedding day. There were months of him untangling 30 years of conditioning, learning what it actually meant to choose his wife over his mother in the small daily ways, not just the dramatic public ones. Eleanor and I have what I'd call a cold but functional peace. She comes to holidays, she's polite, she has never once apologized, and I've made my own peace with the fact that she probably never will. I don't need her approval anymore. I stopped needing it the morning I stood in a parking lot in my pajamas and realized the only venue that had ever truly belonged to me was the one I'd built with my own 2 hands. Magnolia Table is opening a second location next spring, out by the river, with a courtyard twice the size of the first one. I designed it myself. There's a strip of magnolia trees planted along the back wall, the same variety my florist used in my wedding arch, and when people ask me why I picked that spot, I tell them the truth. I wanted somewhere big enough that nobody could ever take it away from me again.